Looking for magic cards? At flipsidegaming.com you can now use the promo code LVD to get a 10% discount on orders over $10 while supporting the channel at the same time. Hello and welcome to another episode of Wacky Wednesday, a weekly series where we explore some wacky deck ideas in both Standard and Modern, and this week we're taking a look at Mettle Red in Standard, a red-white aggro deck built around the legendary enchantment Path of Mettle, which when it enters the battlefield deals 1 damage to each creature without First Strike, Double Strike, Vigilance or Haste, so it can act as a small sweeper effect against token decks. And then whenever you attack with 2 or more creatures with one of the aforementioned abilities, you get to transform Path of Mettle into Tower of Triumph, which is a very powerful land, letting you deal 2 damage to an opponent every turn or destroying a random creature that attacked. So very powerful land that can help you close out the game and control the board at the same time. And of course, to help us transform Path of Mettle faster, all of the creatures in our main deck have one of the 4 aforementioned keywords, and the most relevant keyword of course is Haste, since that allows you to play Path of Mettle on turn 2 and then attack with a bunch of hasty creatures on turn 3 and transform the Path of Mettle into Tower of Triumph right away. And hasty creatures also work nicely in aggro decks, so that's not really a stretch. So let's take a look at the entire deck, starting out with our 1-drops, where we have a total of 8 hasty 1-drops. We have 4 copies of Bomat Courier, which by now everyone knows as a nice card advantage engine, can hide some cards underneath it, and then when the time is right you can sacrifice them to get some of those cards back. We also have 4 copies of Fanatical Firebrand, which is quite good, a nice upgrade over Raging Goblin, since you can also sacrifice him at any point to deal 1 damage to a creature or player, and the damage stacks up nicely. Maybe you can combine the Firebrand with the 1 damage from Path of Mettle to take out a 2 toughness creature, or combine it with one of your many burn spells to take out larger creatures as well. Speaking of burn spells, we have 4 copies of Shock in the 1-drop slot, dealing 2 damage to a creature or player, just nice and efficient. Then moving on to the 2-drops, we have 4 copies of Earthshaker Khenra, a 2-mana 2/1 with haste. When it enters the battlefield, target creature with power less than or equal to Earthshaker Khenra's power can't block it, so a nice way to get your smaller creatures through. And you can also eternalize the Earthshaker Khenra from the graveyard for 6 mana, making it into a 4/4 black zombie jackal warrior with the same enters the battlefield ability, which is now a lot more relevant as the Khenra has 4 power. And Earthshaker Khenra also gets quite a bit better in a deck with Path of Mettle, since by transforming Path of Mettle you have access to an additional land, which helps you get to 6 mana faster for Eternalize. Then we also have 1 copy of Kari's Skyship Raider as a 2-mana 1/3 with Menace and First Strike, so also counts towards Path of Mettle. And when it attacks we get to make Ragavan, a 2/1 red monkey creature token that's tapped and attacking. Then we also have 4 copies of Lightning Strike to round out our burn spells, 2 mana for 3 damage to a creature or player, also very efficient. Then of course our 4 copies of Path of Mettle, which is legendary, so drawing multiples isn't great, but we have some ways of discarding additional cards, as we'll see in a second. Then we also have 4 copies of Relentless Raptor, which is another reason to play white in this deck, as you get access to a 2-mana 3/3 with Vigilance. There is a drawback in that the Raptor has to attack or block each combat if able, and that can definitely come up, but in a deck like this one that's just interested in attacking and preventing the opponent's creatures from blocking, Relentless Raptor fits in quite nicely, and of course having Vigilance means that it counts towards Path of Mettle. Then we also have the full playset of Ahn-Crop Crasher as a 3-mana 3/2 with haste, and when it attacks we can exert it, and that way we get to prevent an opposing creature from blocking at the cost of not untapping the Crasher on the following turn. And last but definitely not least, we have 4 copies of Hazoret the Fervent, which is another reason why the deck can work, as a 4-mana 5/4 very powerful curve topper with Indestructible and Haste. Hazoret can't attack or block unless you have 1 or fewer cards in hand, but her second ability certainly helps, as for 3 mana you get to discard a card and deal 2 damage to each opponent, which also helps you get rid of additional copies of Path of Mettle which you might draw. Then taking a quick look at our mana base, we have 4 copies of Inspiring Vantage, which is very important for the deck, being an untapped land in the early game that produces both a white and red mana. Then a whole bunch of basic lands, 10 mountains and 7 plains, along with 2 copies of Shefet Dunes, which we can also sacrifice in the late game to give all our creatures +1/+1 until end of turn. Then quickly going over the sideboard, we have 1 copy of Fragmentize, thanks to our white splash, to deal with artifacts or enchantments with converted mana cost 4 or less for just 1 mana, which is a nice tempo swing. We have 2 copies of Chandra's Defeat against red decks, 3 copies of Abrade against creature decks, or if we want to deal with problematic artifacts. We have 2 copies of Darefleet Daredevil to gain some card advantage in red mirrors, where you can maybe flash back a lightning strike or a shock from the opponent's graveyard. Can also be nice against more controlling decks as a nice value play. Then we have 2 copies of Chandra, Torch of Defiance, which is a very powerful planeswalker, but the double red in the casting cost is somewhat prohibitive, which is why we only have the 2 copies. And we also have 2 copies of Glorybringer as a more expensive threat, and at 5 mana it's going to be more realistic to have those 2 red sources to cast them. And then we also have 3 copies of Aethersphere Harvester, which is great in aggro mirrors as a way to gain life, and you can also use it to tap down your Relentless Raptor if it's going to have to suicide attack or block a large creature from the opponent, and you don't want it to. So that's the deck, and now let's jump into some games and see how the deck does. Alright, we're on the play. And this hand's pretty good. Missing a 1-drop, and could take a turn before Hazoret comes online, but can't really go wrong with a bunch of 2-drops, a 3-drop, and eventually a Hazoret. And Raptor into Crasher is also a nice curve in case the Raptor would get blocked by a large creature. Another Crasher also helps. Play Raptor, say go. Unclaimed territory, let's see what it names. Names pirates, our opponent could be in a red-black or red-blue pirate deck here. And Kari Zev makes an appearance. So glad we played the Raptor over Kari Zev. Otherwise our opponent could have just eaten the monkey token with Kari Zev, which is kind of a flavor fail. Now we just get to play the Crasher without needing to exert it and get in for 6. And then the Raptor can block the monkey token on the way back. And this is definitely a spot where Relentless Raptor having Vigilance is very relevant, rather than being a drawback. Lightning Strike just kills the Raptor, that's fine. So next turn we can just play another Crasher, get in for 6. And then at some point we'll have access to Hazoret. Alright, our opponent does have a follow-up Rigging Runner, which is going to force us to exert here. But we have plenty of Ahn-Crop Crashers, so we're fine with that. So one needs to exert, one doesn't. Opponent takes 6 down to 8. And the cards we're looking to draw here include 1-drops, cards like Shock or Lightning Strike to finish off our opponent, or just lands so we can make sure that we can play Hazoret at some point, since our opponent in their mono-red Unclaimed Territory deck are going to have trouble actually getting rid of Hazoret. Freebooter is going to miss, but they do get to see our hand. So now we know our opponent is playing these Unclaimed Territories to splash black pirates, and there we see another one, Fathom Fleet Captain. That could be an issue since our opponent having access to all these blockers means our Ahn-Crop Crashers are not very effective, and in fact the Rigging Runner staying on defense also forces us to exert. Alright, let's draw, find a mountain, so now we can play Crasher plus Kari Zev. I think we only exert 1 Crasher on the Rigging Runner. We're fine if our opponent chumps with a Freebooter, and we're fine if our opponent trades with a Captain, I think. Yeah, I think we're fine just emptying our hand here. I guess we should have waited with playing the land here to deny our opponent a little bit of info when making blocks. So let's exert and let's just attack normally, I think, and then be fine with this trade since we have Hazoret coming up. Rigging Runner can't block, and I'm pretty sure we'll see at least a chump from the Freebooter or a trade with the Captain. Alright, so our opponent's happy to trade. We're fine with it as well. Play Kari Zev, say go. And yeah, next turn Hazoret, guaranteed. Don't think our opponent has a way to answer Hazoret, and there we go. Alright, so up against a pirate deck. What do we want to board in? Chandra's Defeat seems okay, as it's just a cheap removal spell for any red pirate. Could also look at Chandra or Harvester, and Daredevil could also be pretty good. Don't think we need Abrade. So these are the cards we could consider, but don't want to overboard, of course. So this is a matchup where Relentless Raptor seems great, Shock is great, Lightning Strike's great. So maybe we can shave some number of Bomat Courier on the draw, and perhaps some Earthshaker Khenras and Ahn-Crop Crashers. I don't think on the draw we want to board in the Chandras. So I think we'll just try it like this, just the 2 Harvesters, 2 Daredevils and 2 Chandras defeat. Seems reasonable. Don't think we need to go all the way up to Glorybringer. Boarding in these Harvesters can be a liability against Freebooter, but I don't expect Freebooters to stay in, at least not all of them. And this hand I think is fine. Double Path of Mettle can be a little awkward. Opponent with a turn 1 Buccaneer, revealing Forerunner of the Coalition. Alright, so they're playing the Black Tudor Pirate. We'll just play Mountain, say go. And then turn 2 we can play the Raptor to play defense, and we have the Harvester to go with the Raptor, so we can always tap our Raptor if we don't want it to attack or block. So we take 2. Opponent on double Mountain, and they're just passing, so they could easily have a Lightning Strike here to kill the Raptor, which I think is a reason enough to play Karizav here instead. I don't think we want a Lightning Strike when we can just block with Karizav, so we'll play Karizav, say go, expect us to get killed, and then we get to have access to the Raptor, which I think is better in this spot. And our opponent just passes, so maybe they don't have the Lightning Strike after all. So perhaps playing the Raptor would have paid off. Opponent found their Swamp, so they could play their 3-drop. Instead they chose to play Fatal Push here. So now we're happy with playing out Karizav first. Buccaneer gets in for 2. But if our opponent doesn't follow up with the 2-drop, we're not too sad. And Firebrand here is quite good as well. So we can play the Raptor, attack with the Firebrand, or we can just play the Harvester. I don't think playing Path of Mettle makes much sense here, since then we're unable to transform it next turn unless we top deck a haste creature. I think I like playing the 2 creatures here. I guess we'll play the Firebrand first, attack for 1 since we're not playing defense, and then play the Raptor second main. And we definitely prefer developing our board when we have these Path of Metals in hand, rather than keeping up Lightning Strike. We didn't put our opponent on having Lightning Strike last turn, and in fact they still don't. 4 mana. And there's the Tudor Pirate. Let's see what opponent is gonna look for here. Could be the 4-drop that gives attacking pirates +2/+0. Instead our opponent just gets a Karizav, so maybe next turn they want a double spell. And our opponent's not attacking, thanks to our Raptor. Alright, we found a Plains. So here actually we can just play 2 copies of Path of Mettle and just wipe our opponent's board. That seems pretty appealing. Sure, let's go for it. So 1 damage to all the opponent's creatures. And we'll play a second copy. Alright, sweet, that worked. Get in for 4. And transform Path of Mettle, and now we're in business. Opponent's at 15, we have a repeatable way of destroying the opponent's creatures or dealing damage. There's Karizav we knew about, and no other play, interesting. So our opponent could be holding up a removal spell now, I guess. Maybe another Fatal Push. Let's just attack with the Raptor, see what happens. Alright, Direfleet Poisoner, I guess that makes sense. So they can give one of their creatures Death Touch, but we do still have Lightning Strike. And we're fine if our opponent blocks here. Our Relentless Raptor has already done its job. And now we just get to play Harvester plus Courier, I think, or we can just keep up Lightning Strike, which is also fine. Yeah, maybe that's better. And then next turn we can play the Courier if we want to. It's a bit more mana efficient. And this way we get to crew with the Harvester on defense, so Karizav doesn't have any great attacks. So let's crew the Harvester and block the Monkey token here. And I think we will use the lifelink ability on the Harvester, just to gain some life back. And a Ruin Raider, so that seems like a good target for Lightning Strike. And Rigging Runner as well, so let's just Lightning Strike the Ruin Raider right now. Even though the Ruin Raider does lose the opponent life, we don't want our opponent to draw out of this. No great attacks with our 1/1s on the ground, but that's fine, since we can just play Bomat Courier, crew the Harvester, get in for 3, and then keep up our tower. I guess we should have used the lifelink ability here to guaranteed gain 3 life, but I don't think it's really gonna matter here. So in response to the ability, we'll use the second mode on our tower to destroy a random attacking creature. I guess, never mind, the way the rulings work with the second mode and Karizev, the token wouldn't actually be a creature that attacked this turn, since it comes into play tapped and attacking. So we could have just let the monkey token come in play, but there's also no downside to using the tower first. And I don't really want to use the Firebrand just to prevent 2 damage here. Opponent says go, we'll draw. So I think we just crew using the Firebrand. And then attack with both, see what happens. Now I definitely don't want to use the lifelink ability, since our opponent could be holding up something like an Abrade to kill the Harvester, and at 14 we're not at risk of dying right away. So this seems fine. I guess we should play the land, since now we can actually sacrifice a courier to draw a card. We'll pass. For opponent's attacks, we can destroy their creature. If they don't, we just ping them for 2. And that's just why the Tower of Triumph is such a good card. And I doubt our opponent has access to Field of Ruin, so they won't be able to get rid of the Tower of Triumph. Opponent does attack. And since we have the inevitability with our Tower of Triumph, I don't think we need to run any risks, so we can just destroy the runner, but our opponent just scoops it up, so Tower of Triumph is triumphant once again. On to the next one. Alright, we're on the play, and this hand's great, so we'll keep. We've got some early 1-drops, Lightning Strike to clear a path, and then Hazoret as a nice curve topper. So let's lead with a Firebrand, get in for a point, and say go. Opponent on Swamp says go. Alright, Path of Mettle, perfect. So it's more mana efficient to play Path of Mettle and then next turn play the Firebrand. But by playing the Firebrand first, we get to get in for an additional point of damage, which I think is more important. So let's play the Firebrand and get in for 2. And also by playing the Path of Mettle next turn, we kind of hide the information that we have access to it. So our opponent might not fire off a removal spell on the Firebrand, since they're just 1-drops. Dragon Skull Summit. Magma Spray, that's unfortunate, so we won't be flipping the path anytime soon. Unless we can find another hasty 1-drop. Nope, just a mountain. Alright, so let's get in for 1. And we could play the Path of Mettle, and we probably should, given that we have a Hazoret in hand, since otherwise we might be stuck with additional cards in hand and being unable to play Hazoret. But the 1 damage to all creatures can definitely be relevant against our opponent's deck, as we see Ether Hub. And our opponent's just gonna Harness Lightning our Firebrand right away. Alright, so looks like Hazoret is gonna have to do the heavy lifting here. We could wait with playing Hazoret, but it's more mana efficient to just cast her right now. Hope our opponent doesn't have something like a Vraska's Contempt. And then we can start beating down with our god. Alright, our opponent with all the answers. That's unfortunate, so now we're kind of out of gas. And just to shock the draw, yeah, I think we just play out our land here, since we do have cards like Earthshaker Khenra to Eternalize. Say go. Alright, our opponent with a Glintsleeve Siphoner, so it looks like they're on the Grixis Energy deck here. So we'll just be shocking the Siphoner here end of turn. Don't want our opponent drawing more cards. Relentless Raptor. Could get awkward here if our opponent has a big blocker, but we do have Lightning Strike to maybe take out a blocker or combine with a Raptor to take out a larger creature. And that makes any haste creature pretty good with our Path of Mettle. A Glintsleeve Siphoner, and there's a Fetid Pools. So do we want to Lightning Strike this Siphoner right now, or do we keep it? I think we're better off just using the Lightning Strike right now. Could be bad if we draw another Path of Mettle, which could just kill the Siphoner, but if we draw something like a Hazoret, we just want to use all our mana. Alright, so let's just get in for 3. And now I think I will keep the land in hand just to conceal information. 5 mana Scarab God, so now we need to top deck a haste creature to transform Path of Mettle to have a chance here. Perfect, Earthshaker Khenra. Get to transform Path of Mettle. That gives us a way to answer our opponent's creatures and get in for more damage. So we'll just attack with both. Transform Path of Mettle. Opponent could decide to block the Khenra here, since the Raptor will have to attack next turn as well, or block, but they decide just to prevent more damage. So they fall to 13, and I think we will play the land here. So our opponent will be able to get back a whole bunch of creatures here, including our own Hazoret. But they decide to go with the Siphoner instead. So it will be interesting to see if our opponent decides to attack with the Scarab God or not. Alright, our opponent keeps the Scarab God on defense. So now we just get to ping our opponent for 2. Opponent's still pretty high at 11 here. But a few burn spells can quickly change that. We're just gonna keep the planes in hand here, I think. And say go. Opponent will start drawing extra cards, but they do lose 1 life with the Siphoner as well, which is definitely relevant. Magma Spray to exile the Khenra. The perfect answer here. Once again. Let's see if the opponent decides to attack this turn. They do. Alright, so let's use our second ability here. Get rid of the Siphoner. Scarab God still rumbles in for 5. And our opponent has a follow-up, as they decided not to use the Scarab God's ability. And it's going to be a Whirler Virtuoso, making any future attacks for us pretty difficult. We drew a Path of Mettle. Alright, so I think we'll keep that in hand to answer potential Thopter tokens our opponent makes. So for now we'll just say go. Opponent should probably just make 2 Thopters end of turn, and that way if we decide to use a second mode on our tower, it's pretty likely that we just end up killing one of the opponent's Thopters. Instead, opponent does not. So they're happy just gaining value from the Scarab God. But despite our opponent having all the answers to our cards, our Tower of Triumph has been pretty good for us so far. Chandra, Torch of Defiance. Is gonna +1, dealing 2 damage to us, puts us to 11. Doesn't look good for the home team here. And once again we'll use the second ability, just to prevent more damage, since from this position we're unlikely to burn our opponent out. Fall to 9, opponent gets back their Scarab God end of turn, but at least we relieved some of the pressure. And Ahn-Crop Crasher. I guess our opponent can just make 2 Thopters and then double block the Crasher. There's no point in exerting, and I think we just go for our opponent's life total at this point. Alright, our opponent's just gonna, I think, make 2 Thopters and then double block, which is fine. So we don't get any value with Path of Mettle, but that was kind of a stretch regardless. Alright, so our opponent is double blocking. That's fine. We'll say go. Chandra pluses, reveal Supreme Will. I don't think our opponent will be casting that. I think they would rather just deploy their Scarab God once again. And in fact we fall to 7. And there's Gonti, Lord of Luxury instead. Not sure why our opponent suddenly decided not to play the Scarab God. So our opponent gets one of our top 4 cards. And they're not attacking with the Virtuoso, respecting the Tower of Power. So let's just deal 2 damage to our opponent. And we will not be redirecting to Chandra, at least not yet. Find a mountain, so might as well play the mountain at this point, say go. And then hope to top deck some burn spells to finish off our opponent, I guess. Opponent shocks us down to 5. So Chandra activation puts us to 3. So we're forced to use our tower to kill one of the opponent's creatures. Opponent plays a Glorybringer. Alright, that's also gonna do it. Opponent can now attack with everyone. And let's see which creature we were gonna destroy. We were gonna kill the Glorybringer, so if we had something like a Lightning Strike in hand, we were not dead yet, but as it turns out, drawing a few too many lands was not great, and our opponent also with the timely answer for our Hazoret, definitely very important. Alright, so what now? I think we want to bring in the Harvesters here, fight through those annoying Thopter tokens, pressure Chandra. Chandra's Defeat also seems pretty good if our opponent has Chandras and Glorybringers in their main deck. And Daredevil also seems okay at flashing back some of the opponent's stuff. Don't think we need our own Chandras, could consider our own Glorybringer, but it's a bit lackluster against opposing Harness Lightnings, and opponent's also going to bring in some Chandra's Defeats, so would rather not bring those in. I think Relentless Raptor has a place here, so I think we'll be keeping that in. And what do we take out now is a question. I think the Crasher is going to get a lot worse after Sideboard. Might even want to take all of them out. I think we can take out 2 Shocks. Maybe we can go down on 1 copy of Path of Mettle and try this. So our opponent could have stuff like Chandra's Defeat and Moment of Craving, which makes our Ahn-Crop Crasher a lot worse after Sideboard. We would like to be on the play, and this hand is acceptable. We will be keeping. We will be able to transform Path of Mettle on turn 4 if our opponent doesn't mess with our creatures, which to be honest is a pretty big if. So let's just jam this Khenra. Get in for 2. Drawing all of these planes could come back to bite us. Opponent with Drowned Catacomb go. Shock, but we're unable to play that plus 1 of our 2 drops here. So I think we just play the Khenra and get in. Might see a Magma Spray here. Instead just an Abrade, alright, not as bad. Means at some point we might be able to Eternalize the Khenra, play the play and say go. So if our opponent plays a creature, we can Daredevil and then flashback the Abrade, which would be pretty sweet. And there's a Tracker. Interesting sideboard card, not sure why it's there, but it will be a nice target for the Daredevil here. Harvester also not a bad draw, so could even consider playing the Harvester and then shocking the Tracker to get in for 2. But the Daredevil is also pretty mana efficient and sets up our Path of Mettle for next turn. Path of Mettle would also have killed the Tracker, but then we're unable to develop Harvester or Daredevil, which I think is more important here. So let's go with this play. And our opponent still has plenty of 1 toughness creatures that we can kill with our Path of Mettle. Abrade kills the Tracker, and we get to get in for 2. Let's see if they have another removal spell. Looks like that's not the case. Sweet, so opponent falls to 14, and Harness Lightning on our Daredevil end of turn. Interesting. Could this be a Vraska's Contempt? No, just a Gonti. That's going to be a decent blocker for the Khenra here. But we do have the option of attacking with the Khenra, opponent blocks, and then we can Path of Mettle to finish off the Gonti. Which is not a great play when we want to keep creatures in play to transform the Path of Mettle in the first place. But it is still a play we can make. Gonti finds the card. Untap. Draw Hazoret. That's spicy. So that gives us an alternate angle of attack. So I think the play is just to play the Harvester, keep up Shock and say go. Opponent's got 5 mana, which is enough for a Scarab God here. Opponent does get in for 2. Alright, we'll take it. And opponent casts a Relentless Raptor, which they found with Gonti. That's fine. And end of turn, I think we just shock our opponent. Opponent is keeping up 3 mana, which can mean Supreme Will. So that's something we need to think about. So we could just jam Hazoret here, play the land and attack, and hope our opponent doesn't have a Supreme Will, which, to be honest, being on the draw against an aggro deck Supreme Will seems pretty poor, so it could be that the opponent has taken it out, but you never know. If our opponent's most efficient play was just playing a Relentless Raptor, that also seems pretty suspicious. So what we could also do is just crew the Harvester, see what our opponent does, see if they end up playing something like Abrade, and then post-combat we can still play the Hazoret to play around a potential Supreme Will. Opponent does not block, and I think to further incentivize our opponent to kill the Harvester, we're just gonna give it lifelink. Opponent still doesn't bite. Alright, I think we're playing Hazoret after all, since I don't think we can afford not to. And our opponent has an Essence Scatter instead of a Supreme Will. Alright, that makes more sense. So a Relentless Raptor is gonna do a number on us here. Gets in for 3 points and still plays defense. But if we find one more land, we can also Eternalize our Khenra. And yep, there's land number 6, so I think we're just jamming the Khenra. Relentless Raptor is unable to block. And now the question is, do we animate our Harvester or not? Our opponent's likely to wanna kill the Earthshaker Khenra here, but I guess they could just take the 4 and then have Gonti to block the Khenra, and at that point having the Harvester is pretty valuable. But we would be getting in for an additional point of damage, which in the end I think is worth it here. So let's crew. And I won't be using the lifelink ability, but I will be attacking. So let's get in for 7. See if our opponent has any removal spells. If they don't, they fall to 2. Alright, so opponent's pretty close to dead here. End of turn Supreme Will. And of course they couldn't counter our Eternalized Khenra, but they did keep him Supreme Will, which is a little surprising. So it could be that they had access to both Supreme Will and Essence Scatter last turn, but decided to go with the Essence Scatter. So our opponent needs to find an answer to the Flying Harvester, otherwise they're just dead next turn. So I think the play next turn is to play the Path of Mettle, attack with both Khenras, and then just finish off our opponent with the Tower of Triumph. And if our opponent kills one of our haste creatures pre-combat to prevent us from transforming the Path of Mettle, we can use the targeted creature to crew the Harvester. So that's gonna work out nicely. Yeah, can just play the Path of Mettle here. And our opponent essentially needs 2 removal spells here, otherwise they're dead. So the Path of Mettle resolves, and now we can just move to combat. And if our opponent lets us attack and they can't gain life, they're dead to the Tower of Triumph. If they try to kill one of the Khenras, the Harvester will fly over for the win. 4 mana, is this a Glimmer of Genius perhaps? Nope, 5 mana, so this is something else. 6, Gearhulk, alright, so our opponent can flash back, I guess, a Harness Lightning, but that still doesn't do it. Yep, so Harness Lightning can target one of our Khenras, and then we can just crew the Harvester, and Fatal Push cannot kill the Harvester, so we're good on that front. So let's just attack with the Harvester, and that should be enough. Alright, so very close game here against Grixis Energy. Let's go to game 3, where I don't think we change anything. Let's just run it back. Alright, this hand seems good. It's got a little bit of everything. 1 and a 2-drop, some removal, eventually Hazoret. And removal spells and Khenra can also help our Courier get through for damage. So this seems like a very good 7. Let's see what opponent does. Opponent decides to keep their 6 and leads with a tap land. Raptor's also not bad here. We'll have to wait and see which 2-drop we lead with. But for now we can just get in for 1. Opponent's got access to perfect mana. Fanatical Firebrand. So we're definitely playing one of our 2-drops here. And the question is which one. I would rather get the Khenra countered so we can later Eternalize it. But having the Khenra's ability for the Courier later can be useful. Playing the Raptor would be better if our opponent just has something like Magma Spray which can't kill the Raptor. So I think we'll just get in for 1 and then play the Raptor second main. And if our opponent has Essence Scatter, that's still not the end of the world, since we also have a Hazoret in hand. which does not want to meet Essence Scatter. So our opponent definitely with a more controlling take on Grixis energy, as we saw Gear Hulk and Essence Scatters. As it turns out, maybe playing the Khenra would have been slightly better in this spot, but we'll see here. Mountain the draw, excellent, so now we get to play the Firebrand and the Khenra. And if our opponent has access to a removal spell, I imagine they will use it on the Bomat Courier first. Opponent just takes all the damage, so they could have access to a sweeper effect as well. Nope, instead our opponent just passes. And lets us draw for the turn. Alright, so we're just jamming here. No flash creature we need to concern ourselves about. Could consider keeping back the Firebrand. If our opponent goes Vraska's Contempt on the Khenra, we could shoot it, but we can also just use a shock. Opponent lets the damage happen, falls to 10, and is seriously on the back foot here. We've got 5 points of burn, and Bomat Courier, which we can sacrifice to refuel. Opponent's gonna tap out for the Scarab God, which is just not gonna cut it here. Just a little too slow. End of turn we can just fire off a bunch of burn spells, put the opponent to 5. And then we can decide whether or not to play out Hazoret, or maybe use the Courier. Land is perfect here, so we just get to do it all. Jam Hazoret. Attack with Courier. And that's just gonna be game over. So almost a perfect draw here in game 3. Did not find our Path of Mettle, but still managed to get there. So our opponent forced to block Hazoret. They take 4. Don't even have to sacrifice the Courier quite yet, we can just wait, since otherwise Hazoret will be unable to attack. Is this a Vraska's Contempt on Hazoret? Yep, alright, so our opponent gets to gain 2, up to 3, so if they have another removal spell, technically they're not dead, but still not in a good spot. So I think end of turn we sacrifice. We could attack and get an extra card, but I think we just want to be mana efficient. And I'm sure we'll find more haste creatures or burn spells with all these cards. There we go, Lightning Strike. So we can just play the Courier, attack with everyone, and if our opponent has a removal spell, they're dead to Lightning Strike. Alright, perfect. Managed to beat Grixis energy with our Mettle Red, so we'll be back with the next one. Alright, we're on the draw, and this hand has some powerful cards in it, but I don't think we can keep this. Just a little too slow. If we draw more lands, we'll never get to attack with Hazoret, so let's go to 6. This isn't much better, but I think this is a keep, and we'll just have to hope to find some cheap creatures to attack with. Bottom the mountain here. Opponent with Island. So this hand is kind of all in on Hazoret getting us there. But blue decks don't always have a ton of answers to Hazoret, so who knows. Shock the draw. So our opponent could be on a blue-white cycling deck perhaps, after cycling the Curator. At least by drawing the shock here we can just fire off these burn spells to empty our hand for Hazoret. Opponent with a Drowned Catacomb instead, so blue-black cycling. And yep, there's Vile Manifestation on turn 2. That's a pretty scary creature. And with no double red, we can't even kill it with Lightning Strike plus Shock. Think we'll hang on to Shock for now. Found a Bomat Courier. So I think we'll just play the Courier and say go. That way if our opponent decides to attack, we can attack them back. And if they stay on defense, maybe we can attack and then trade Lightning Strike and Courier for the Vile Manifestation. Our opponent is attacking. Let's see if they cycle any more cards before damage. Just the Fetid Pools, so Manifestation gets in for 2. And a Curator, so they get in for 3 points. So now it's interesting, do we use a Shock end of turn just to try and empty our hand, put the opponent to 18? Do we hope to draw a red source so we can use both removal spells on the Vile Manifestation, which could be an issue. But I guess Hazoret can just block the manifestation at some point if our opponent doesn't answer Hazoret. But our opponent's likely to have some form of interaction, either counter spells or copies of Vraska's Contempt. It's definitely tricky. I think I'm going to try and untap first, see what we draw. Found a Karizev. Alright, so let's get in for one with Courier, since it's not gonna block anyways. And then we can play Karizev. So it can definitely end up costing us here if we're unable to empty our hand. But if we can find that second red source and take out the manifestation, we buy ourselves a lot of time. 4 mana. Could be that the manifestation stays on defense here, but they have a second copy, alright. And they are getting in there. And they just let damage happen. So our opponent could easily have something like a Sensor or an Essence Scatter, but I think the plan here is just to play a second Bomat Courier, attack with everyone. If our opponent blocks, we can use Lightning Strike to finish off the manifestation, which isn't pretty, but at least gets one of them off the board. Opponent cannot block Karizev since she has Menace, so has to block something else. They decide to prevent more damage by blocking Ragavan. So we could actually just use Shock here to finish off the manifestation, rather than having to use the Lightning Strike, which I think we want to do. Yeah, I think we're better off just saving the Lightning Strike, since Bomat Courier plus Lightning Strike also takes out a manifestation. By killing the manifestation, we also grow the first one, which is relevant. And Archfiend of Ifnir hardcast. Archfiend of Ifnir is a big problem here, since if our opponent just cycles one card, we lose both our couriers. We did find a mountain, so I think killing the Archfiend is a priority here. So I will be attacking with everyone. And looks like our opponent's just taking the damage. So now we have another option, which is just playing Hazoret on defense. And then we can still use the Bomat Courier's ability if we want to, although at that point Hazoret's unable to block. But I think we start by playing Hazoret here. And then we'll have to see what our opponent does. Very likely that they still have a Cycler in hand, and that's gonna force us to make a decision. Yep, so we can't afford to sacrifice the Bomat Courier, otherwise Hazoret cannot block the Vile Manifestation. So opponent cycles a second time. Not super relevant, just prevents 1 damage from Hazoret and grows the manifestation a bit. Alright, and a third time, that is relevant since now we lose Karizev. Hazoret down to a 2-1, so is there a way we can still win? I don't think so. Since we take 5 from the Archfiend, opponent should not be attacking with the Vile Manifestation here since this is a free block. Drakehaven. I guess we need to find a removal spell for the Archfiend and then we can still survive. Draw, find a Relentless Raptor, which is not gonna do it here. No point in showing the opponent our Relentless Raptor, so we'll just say go, see what our opponent does. And opponent cycles some more. This does kill the Hazoret. Alright. So 2 early Vile Manifestations plus a timely Archfiend did get the job done here. We were actually rather close to killing our opponent, since we never got to attack with Hazoret, never got to cast a Lightning Strike. But it was not meant to be. So our opponent attacks us for a whole bunch, and we're dead. Alright, so on to sideboarding against the cycling deck. So they do have Drakehaven, but I don't know if that's reason enough to board in Fragmentize, since Drakehaven's the only target for it. I do like the Harvester in this matchup, since it can block those 2/2 Drakes, and that way we get to fly over those Vile Manifestations. Glorybringer is pretty good against Archfiend of Ifnir, and can also kill the Vile Manifestation, so that seems like a pretty good addition. Same with Chandra. Shock seemed pretty bad in this matchup. Doesn't kill a lot of the opponent's stuff. Relentless Raptor also kind of seems like a liability against the Vile Manifestation specifically. So we can probably cut the Raptor here. I guess we need one more card, so we either keep in Shock, either bring in the Fragmentize, or just keep in one Relentless Raptor, which might be necessary to transform Path of Mettle. So I guess we'll try it like this. And now we also have 3 Harvesters to tap down the Raptor we would like to be on the play. And this hand is acceptable. This hand's definitely a bit slow, but we do have some powerful cards and the lands to cast them. So let's get in for one. Opponent leads with islands. They're probably going to cycle end of turn. Let's get in for one more. So what's our ideal draw? I guess next turn just an Ahn-Crop Crasher, then something like a Chandra. Alright, our opponent does have the turn 2 Vile Manifestation, but our opponent didn't cycle anything on turn 1. And alright, there's Chandra. It's a pretty free attack here with the Bomat Courier. And our opponent might not even block, fearing a Lightning Strike on the Manifestation. Alright, actually a pretty risky block here, I think. But our opponent goes for it anyways, and then next turn we can play Chandra to take out the Manifestation. Field of Ruin, alright, that's actually an answer to our Path of Mettle. And there's Drakehaven. So I don't hate our spot here. We've got some powerful cards coming up, and then eventually we can refuel our hand with Bomat Courier. So let's just play Chandra, which is gonna do a good job of getting rid of the Manifestation and then pressuring our opponent. Could also decide to plus the Chandra first, since we can still just attack with the Courier here. But by minusing, we do get to attack for one more damage with the Courier. And next turn, Glorybringer can also get rid of potential Drakes our opponent makes. Although I imagine they'll make Drakes at instant speed, so could also decide to keep the Glorybringer on defense, which is definitely an option. We'll see here. Another Drakehaven, so our opponent is unable to make any Drakes this turn, since they only have 1 mana available. So we can do some serious damage here, as we also find a Lightning Strike, so we can plus Chandra for mana, and then if we play a land, we can play Hazoret and Lightning Strike, but then our hand's still not empty enough, so that doesn't quite work. So I guess we can just play Glorybringer, Lightning Strike our opponent, which is also pretty good, since we do want to empty our hand with Hazoret. So using the +1 to exile the top card I don't think is as good as just making 2 red mana. So let's play Glorybringer. Plus 4 mana. Lightning Strike our opponent. Get in for 5. And Bomat Courier already with 5 cards underneath. Alright, our opponent finally starts cycling. They can make 2 Drake tokens. And they do have another land, which gives them a few more options. Let's draw. Fanatical Firebrand. We can just empty your hand here, play Hazoret, play Firebrand, and still have mana up for Bomat Courier. Could also plus Chandra to see what's on top, so we might as well do that first. Bomat Courier, I think we're just better off dealing 2 damage to our opponent. And then play Hazoret. And play Firebrand. Attack with everyone. And we will be exerting the Glorybringer here. I guess we'll keep the Firebrand on defense. I meant to exert a Glorybringer here, but accidentally skipped through that part. So now our opponent does have the option of double blocking the Glorybringer, but instead they just double jump, so I guess that worked out. Say go. Opponent untaps. Faith of the Devoted, yep, that's fine. More enchantments that require mana before they do anything. And their opponent clearly didn't have another card to cycle, otherwise he could have made another Drake end of turn, or just made another Drake and double blocked the Glorybringer. So I think we'll just be untapping here. No need to sacrifice a Bomat Courier yet. Then we can plus Chandra to deal 2 damage to our opponent. I guess we are casting this. And then attack with everyone. And now our opponent should be very much dead. Alright, on to game 3, where do we want to reconsider the Fragmentize now that we're on the draw? Perhaps now it gets a little bit better, and seeing Faith of the Devoted as well, it's clear that our opponent has plenty of targets for it. Perhaps we shave 1 Crasher, just to keep the curve a bit lower, and the Crasher also trades for Drake tokens, which isn't ideal. So let's try this configuration. So this hand is probably a mulligan, only 1 land. Even if we hit a second land, we can only play Khenra and Lightning Strike, which is not gonna cut it. So let's go to 6, and this is better. And Dunes I think will bottom since we're looking for creatures to go with our Harvester. Even though we would like a 4th land at some point with Chandra, I think we'll draw some lands before we get to turn number 4. Alright, Path of Mettle to draw. Not the best here. We did also take out some creatures, so that does make the path a bit worse. But if we do get to flip it, our opponent's gonna have a hard time coming back. Opponent does have the Vile Manifestation on 2. No cycling cards in the graveyard quite yet. Second Path of Mettle. So we could wait until turn 4 and then play Path of Mettle and Lightning Strike to combine to kill a Manifestation, but I think I would rather just get one out there right now, and then we still have that play available in a few turns. But we're probably gonna end up using Chandra to get rid of the Manifestation instead. So let's say go. And is this a Drake Haven? It is. So our opponent with their ideal 2 and their ideal 3. So all they need now is a bunch of cycling cards. Bomat Courier, not bad. So we'll play the Harvester here. And then next turn we have Bomat Courier, which can crew the Harvester. And if we find another haste creature, we can transform Path of Mettle. Could have gotten in with the Bomat Courier just to get 1 card underneath, but it's a lot more mana efficient to play the Harvester. I guess if our opponent blocked, since they did last game, we could have also used Lightning Strike on the Manifestation. So maybe should have reconsidered that play, since if our opponent was so eager to block last time, they perhaps would have blocked here as well. And now attacking with the Bomat Courier kind of gives away that we have a Lightning Strike, and our opponent also just has a Drake to block with. Alright, so our opponent's going off here, but we do have the Harvester to block the Drake tokens at the moment. Opponent gets in for 2. And there's a Firebrand, so we could transform the Path of Mettle if we wanted to, but then we are giving up both of our creatures essentially, unless we Lightning Strike one of the Drakes before our opponent gets to block, which I guess is reasonable. It's probably worth it here since we're kind of tight on mana, and by transforming this, next turn we can also activate Chandra. So sure, let's go for it. So now we have the option of using Lightning Strike right now, just to get in for 1 damage, or we can let blocks happen first, and then we get to basically keep whatever 1-drop we prefer. I would prefer to keep the Bomat Courier in this spot, I think, but it's not like I have a huge preference, so I think in that case I'm better off just using Lightning Strike and letting the opponent decide. That way we get to get in for an additional point of damage. Opponent decides to kill the Firebrand, so we get to keep the Bomat Courier for now. So hopefully our opponent does not have the Field of Ruin to blow up our Tower of Triumph. It doesn't look like that's the case, but they do have a second Drake Haven, which is pretty scary. And our opponent's attacking with both, so we fall to 14. But we're not in a terrible spot here if our opponent doesn't counter our Chandra. Then we get to kill the Vile Manifestation, and then keep the Harvester on defense, forcing the opponent to basically get rid of one of their Drakes if they want to kill the Chandra. Don't think we have any other plays. We could just sit on the Tower of Triumph, I suppose, which isn't terrible since we can also just play defense with the Harvester. But the problem with just playing defense is that our opponent just starts making 2 Drakes every turn, and we're easily gonna fall behind, and the Tower of Triumph is not gonna really help us there. So I think we risk it, hope that this resolves. And this can put some pressure on the opponent. Alright, Chandra resolves. So let's try to get rid of the Val Manifestation. And then we'll just be saying go. Try to protect Chandra, make the opponent spend a few resources to get rid of Chandra. But their opponent did not have a Drake end of turn, so unless they have a removal spell for the Harvester, they'll be unable to kill Chandra. Opponent is attacking, so they might have something here. But given that we have a second Harvester, this is not a disaster. Alright, their opponent lets us block. So could have been a bluff. And a Gate to the Afterlife, I see, so our opponent has that combo in their deck as well. But they're currently lacking the creatures in the graveyard. In fact, they have 2 Gates to the Afterlife, but only 3 creatures in the graveyard so far. And this might explain why all our opponent's cycling creatures were actual creatures, and they didn't show us any spells like Censor yet, which in this spot definitely is good for us. So found the plains. Think we start by plussing Chandra. Guess we should have played a land in case we reveal a Glorybringer here, so that was definitely a mistake. Bomat Courier I think is gonna be more useful than 2 damage, so we'll cast it. So let's play the land, play another Harvester, and given that our opponent's unable to make any Drakes, we will just crew with the Harvester using the newest Bomat Courier so that we get more cards underneath the one that already has a card underneath it, and then attack for 4. And we might as well gain some life here, now that coast is clear. And all of a sudden, I don't hit our position. Our opponent needs to chain multiple cycling creatures before their gate does anything. And we do have the Harvesters to fight the opposing Drake Havens. Faith of the Devoted, so opponent pretty heavy on the payoff cards for cycling, but unable to find the cycling cards themselves. Find a mountain, let's play the mountain plus with Chandra. Fragmentize, guess we're casting that, blowing up a Drake Haven. So if your opponent wants to cycle, they would have to cycle right now to make 2 Drakes. They could still have a 2 mana cycling card, I guess, and make 1 Drake. So I think we're just crewing 1 Harvester, just to get an additional card underneath the Courier. Say go, and then we can shoot the opponent for 2 end of turn. And they're gonna need to find their cycling creatures pretty quickly here. Alright, they do. So they can make a Drake and they can drain us for 2. And I guess we forgot to use a lifelink ability on the Harvester last turn. Finds a land. And end of turn, we'll use the Tower of Triumph. Let's just draw for the turn, find a Crasher. Alright, so what now? I think we just plus Chandra once again. Find a Relentless Raptor. Yeah, I think I'm happy casting the Raptor here. Then we can also just cast the Crasher. And then crew both Harvesters. One with the Courier and one with the Raptor. And attack with everyone. We could have exerted the Crasher, which would have been fine, but I'm also fine if our opponent just blocks the Crasher. If our opponent blocks the Courier, we'll just sacrifice it. Opponent does decide to block the Crasher, which is fine, so if they take 7 down to 4, and now they're unable to pressure the Chandra. While if we exerted and our opponent kept the Drake and maybe had another cycling card, they could have killed the Chandra. Yet again, we forgot to use the lifelink mode on Harvester, but I don't think it's going to be super relevant here. And our opponent just with a hard cast, a Godpharaoh's Gift. Alright, that's actually pretty good here, since they get to kill Chandra if they so desire, but I guess then they're dead on the way back. So I don't think it's going to be good enough. But Val Manifestation definitely combos nicely with Godpharaoh's Gift, since it still gets the additional power for each cycling card in the graveyard. Opponent's just attacking our face. and then they'll be dead on the way back. So definitely made a few missteps this game. Should have definitely gained some life with our harvesters by now, and should have played our land before plussing the Chandra. And I think we also forgot to exert Glorybringer at one point. Got the GGs from our opponent. We found a Shefet Dunes for the turn, which is also not bad. Can plus Chandra to see what's on top. Fanatical Firebrand, sure. Let's cast it. And just attack with everyone. Sweet, managed to beat a blue-black cycling. I wanna thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed. And as always, have a nice day. I also want to thank all my patrons for supporting the channel, and you can do so yourself as well over at patreon.com/LegenVD, where you get cool rewards for supporting the channel, as well as getting us closer to our goals, where with every goal reached, we will release an additional weekly series. So if you want to see more content, Patreon is the place to go.